Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're talking about uh, taking those home inspection skills to a whole new level. We're talking about becoming an expert witness.
It is a natural progression for a lot of really experienced inspectors. Your expertise can really be valuable in these legal cases.
Right. Like it's taking everything you know about construction, about defects, about building code, and then putting it to work in this whole other arena. And to guide us through this deep dive today, we've got expert witness and building consultant Gary Smith's 10 essential questions to consider, before even taking on a case.
Yeah.
And these aren't your typical, checklist kind of questions that you would bring to an inspection. These are the questions that even seasoned inspectors might not think of, but could save them a lot of trouble down the line.
Yeah, these questions are just as much about protecting yourself as they are about preparing yourself for the case.
So, okay, let's unpack this a little bit. The first question that Gary Smith asks is, what are the specific details and objectives of this case? Sounds pretty simple, right?
Yeah, it sounds really simple on the surface. But it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of I got this case, but just like you wouldn't start an inspection without your thermal camera, you really shouldn't take on a case without fully understanding the details first.
Yeah, it's like knowing what you're walking into. Is this a case about, I don't know, a cracked foundation? Or is it about water damage? Or is it about a roof that decided to fly south for the winter?
Exactly. And what are you even trying to do? What's the objective? Are you trying to figure out if the contractor cut corners? Or if, building codes were violated? Or if a homeowner's complaint is even valid? Having that clarity, right up front is super important.
Yeah, it's are we dealing with a leaky faucet here or a full-blown plumbing nightmare? You need to know the scale to even know where to begin, right? So question one is definitely about setting the stage. It's the who, what, when, where, why of the case. But then Gary Smith's second question is where I think things get even more interesting. He asks, do I have sufficient expertise in this specific area?
I think this is one of those questions where it separates the rookies from the really experienced expert witnesses because, it's about knowing your limits.
It's about saying, is this really my area of expertise?
Yeah.
And being honest about that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's say, you've built your whole reputation on spotting foundation issues. You can spot a crack a mile away, and then suddenly you get asked to be an expert witness on a case about, a totally botched HVAC installation.
HVAC is a whole nother beast.
Oh, yeah. And you could end up in way over your head.
Yeah.
And that'll damage your reputation faster than you can say ductwork.
Totally. It'd be like asking someone who, I don't know, restores antique furniture to go assess the structural integrity of a bridge. Yeah, they're both skilled, but very different areas.
Yeah. And this applies to all different kinds of niches within home inspection too. Maybe expertise is historic properties, right? But then you get asked to take on a case about a brand new subdivision that's having all these problems with, soil grading. That could be risky.
Yeah. Totally.
Totally.
Because the regulations could be different, the common problems are different, even the construction methods could be different.
Yeah, totally. So, knowing when to say no to a case is just as important as knowing when to say yes. It's about protecting yourself, protecting your credibility, and making sure that you can provide, accurate and reliable expertise.
Yeah, so we've got the case details, we know our expertise.
Yeah.
And now, Gary Smith's third question gets into the heart of it a little bit. What will my role as an expert witness be? I think when some people think about this, they picture dramatic courtroom showdowns, but it's not always like that, is it?
No, not always. It's not always about, grabbing your toolbox and, doing some big dramatic on-site inspection, although those can be pretty cool.
So it's not always about finding that one loose screw that brings the whole case crashing down.
No, sometimes it's a lot more like detective work. You might be poring over blueprints, going over contracts, reading inspection reports, really just getting to know the project through its paper trail.
So instead of crawling through attics, you're combing through documents.
Yeah, exactly. Let's say there's a dispute about mold growth, right? Was that because of, faulty construction, or was that a maintenance issue that the homeowner was ignoring? Analyzing reports, looking for inconsistencies, that can be just as crucial as anything else.
Yeah, it's like piecing together a puzzle. Right?
Yeah.
You're looking for those missing pieces or the parts that don't quite fit.
Yeah. And sometimes that's more important than a site visit, because a site visit is just a snapshot in time. But those documents, those tell the story of the entire project.
And sometimes Those stories are very revealing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our case details, we know our expertise, we kind of understand our role, whether it's boots on the ground or eyes on the documents.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Gary Smith's fourth question. What evidence and information will I be working with?
This is critical. Imagine, you're on a case and there's claims of mold and, maybe some plumbing issues from how it was constructed, and you're ready to go do your inspection and everything. But then you find out later, oh, there were all these plumbing diagrams and photos from behind the walls that were never given to you.
Oh, wow, that's a big blind spot, right? You're making judgments on incomplete information.
Exactly. And that's why questions 4 and 8, which we'll get to later, are so important. You need all of the information. Depositions, discovery documents, even reports from the opposing expert.
So you're not just investigating the problem, you're investigating the entire context.
Yeah.
Like the big picture.
Exactly. Let's say you're dealing with that uneven floor issue, right? You need to see what were the original plans. Like, what are the acceptable tolerances for that kind of structure?
And then compare that to what you find when you do a site inspection.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
It's all about connecting the dots, seeing how everything fits together or doesn't, depending on the situation.
It sounds like preparation is key. You don't want to be caught off guard when you're in court because you didn't have all the information up front.
You got it. And that's why Gary Smith's 5th question is so important. Will I be required to conduct a physical inspection of the property? Sometimes that's really where the aha moments happen.
Okay, so tell me more about that. When are those site inspections really crucial?
Well, take a case where a homeowner's claiming, the contractor totally messed up their roof and now they've got water damage. You could look at photos all day long, but actually getting up on that roof, inspecting the flashing, looking at the shingles, seeing how it all ties together.
That's where you see if the contractor used roofing nails instead of finishing nails or
yes.
something.
Or let's say, there's a dispute about uneven floors in a newly built house. A site visit lets you actually, do a level survey, determine if that slope is even within acceptable standards.
Yeah, you can't really do that from the blueprints. You got to be there. You got to be in person to get the full picture.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to be really clear about this stuff up front. Do you have the time to do a really thorough site inspection? Do you have all the equipment you'd need?
Yeah, it's like that blower door test example that you talked earlier. If you need to do that to assess air leakage, you need to factor that into your cost and the time it's going to take.
Precisely. Being organized and prepared is so important here. But, let's talk about something even more nuanced, maybe. Conflicts of interest. That's Gary Smith's 6th question.
Yeah, that's the one that can make or break your credibility right there.
Yeah, it's all about impartiality. Let's say you're called to consult on this case, and then you find out, oh, the defendant, it's a contractor you've known for years. Maybe you've even worked on projects together in the past.
Oh, that's a big red flag, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because even if you're being completely unbiased in your assessment, there's still that perception of bias.
Exactly. And it's not just about past collaborations either, right? Maybe you're really good friends with the plaintiff's attorney, or you sit on a board together or something. These are all things you absolutely have to disclose up front.
Yeah. It's about maintaining that professional distance, making sure that your judgment is seen as fair and unbiased by everybody involved.
And that ties into Gary Smith's 10th question, too, which we'll get to. But it's all about maintaining your independence when you're forming your conclusions. You're not there to advocate for whoever's paying you, right? You're there to provide an unbiased professional opinion based on the facts.
So even if the attorney who hired you is really hoping for a specific outcome, you can't let that influence your professional judgment.
Absolutely not. Let's say, you're brought in to assess if maybe a moisture problem was caused by a poorly installed HVAC system. But then when you do your inspection, you realize, well, the HVAC installation, it might not have been perfect, but the real issue here is a major design flaw in the building itself.
So it's not about pointing fingers. It's about uncovering the truth, wherever it may lead.
Exactly. And that can be difficult, especially if the attorney who hired you is really hoping you'll find in their client's favor.
Yeah, it takes a lot of integrity to stand by your findings, even if it might not be what the person who's paying you wants to hear.
And that's what separates the true professionals from the rest.
It sounds like kind of a delicate balancing act. In a way, you have to be thorough, you have to be detail-oriented, you have to be objective, but you're also, navigating all these potential pitfalls and maintaining your own sense of professional integrity.
It's definitely a challenge, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Knowing that your expertise can help bring clarity to these sometimes really complex situations, I mean, that's a really powerful motivator.
Yeah, it really brings a whole other dimension to, the world of home inspection.
Absolutely. But speaking of being organized and prepared, there are a couple more of these questions that we should really, get into because they're often overlooked, but they're really important for protecting yourself in the long run.
You mean questions 7 and 9, the ones about deadlines and, importantly, money?
You got it. Yeah. So deadlines are huge in legal cases, right?
Yeah.
Attorneys are working on these really tight schedules, and delays can have serious consequences. That's why Gary Smith's seventh question is so important. He says, what are the deadlines for my involvement in this case?
Yeah, it's not just about, being efficient with your own work. It's about understanding, like the court's timeline as well.
Exactly. You might be asked to deliver a report before a crucial hearing or, be ready to testify on a very specific date. And if you're juggling, multiple cases, maybe even your regular inspection work, it's really easy for those deadlines to sneak up on you.
Yeah, and I imagine missing a deadline probably doesn't reflect too well on you either.
No, not at all. It can really undermine your credibility and even damage those relationships that you've built with the attorneys that you work with.
So communication is key here, like making sure that you understand the expectations right from the get-go.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification on those deadlines or even to negotiate, like a timeline that works for everybody involved.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so to recap for a second, we've covered the importance of understanding the case details, knowing your expertise, clarifying your role, gathering all the necessary information you're going to need, and figuring out if a site visit is even needed or not. We also talked about the importance of disclosing any conflicts of interest, maintaining your independence, sticking to those deadlines, and being upfront about that payment structure.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to Gary Smith's eighth question, which kind of ties back into this whole idea of gathering information. He asks, will I have access to all relevant documentation, including depositions, discovery documents, and expert reports from the opposing side? This one really emphasizes that, being an effective expert witness isn't just about doing your own thing. It's about understanding the full picture, not just relying on your own observations or limited information.
Right, it's like putting together a puzzle, right? You need all the pieces to really see the full image.
Exactly. Imagine a case where you're tasked with, evaluating a potential construction defect. You might be tempted to just rely on your own inspection and your own assessment, but having access to things like depositions from the contractors, subcontractors, even previous owners can give you super valuable context.
So you're saying that those depositions might reveal something that, like, completely changes your understanding of the situation.
Exactly. They might highlight, repairs that were done that you didn't know about, alterations, or even environmental factors that maybe contributed to the problem.
Wow, it's like getting a behind-the-scenes look at, like, the entire history of the property
Yeah.
and, the whole construction process.
Right. And then there are those discovery documents, right? The contracts, the change orders, any inspection reports, permits, all that stuff can reveal discrepancies between what was planned, what everyone agreed on, and what was actually built.
So a discrepancy in those documents could indicate that a contractor, like, I don't know, didn't follow the blueprints, or that changes were made without proper documentation.
Exactly. And, we can't forget about the expert reports from the opposing side. Reviewing their findings, their methodologies, their conclusions, it can actually really help you, anticipate their arguments and then strengthen your own.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's kind of like a chess game, in a way. You're anticipating your opponent's moves.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about something that can sometimes be a little uncomfortable to talk about: money.
Yeah, for sure. And Gary Smith's ninth question addresses this head on. He says, what is the payment structure for my services? And it's really crucial to get this stuff figured out to avoid misunderstandings later on.
Things could get really messy if you're not clear about your fees,
Yeah.
what you're going to be reimbursed for right from the start.
Oh, absolutely. So are you being paid an hourly rate for reviewing documents and writing reports? Is there a separate fee for any court appearances? What about travel expenses for site visits or the cost of renting specialized equipment even?
Oh, right. And you can't forget about things like, maybe hiring an assistant to help with research or paying for lab tests. That stuff adds up.
All of that needs to be discussed up front. Having a detailed contract for your services, just like you would with any other client, protects you and the attorney that's hiring you. It makes sure that you're compensated fairly for all your time and your expertise, and it prevents any surprises or, disagreements later on.
Right. Transparency is key here, just like it was with those, potential conflicts of interest we talked about earlier.
By thoroughly examining all of the relevant documentation, you're not just building a stronger case, but you're also really demonstrating your thoroughness and your own credibility as an expert witness.
Right. You're showing that you've done your homework and you're not just like jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. It's about providing the court with a really well-informed, unbiased assessment that's based on a comprehensive understanding of the facts.
So Gary Smith's emphasis on having access to all the relevant documentation, it really just underscores the depth and the diligence that's required to really excel as an expert witness.
Absolutely. It's not just about knowing your field. It's about being a really thorough investigator, a skilled communicator, and, a truly trusted advisor to the court.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how it all comes together, right? Like the technical expertise, the investigative skills, the whole communication aspect of it. It's like being a home inspector just elevates to a whole new level when you start doing expert witness work.
It really does. It's pretty cool. I think it's really a testament to how much a skilled home inspector can bring to the table, because you're not just, identifying problems anymore. You're explaining them, you're providing context. Sometimes you're even like defending your findings,
It's like that classic courtroom scene where the expert witness like breaks down all these complex technical details, but they do it in a way that everybody understands.
Right. And that's a skill in itself. Being able to communicate clearly, concisely, that's so important, especially when you're dealing with all this industry jargon.
So it's not enough to just know your stuff. You got to be able to share it in a way that makes sense to everybody.
Exactly. And that's something that home inspectors, just by the nature of their work, they tend to be really good at. Think about it. You're constantly explaining these complex issues to homeowners in a way that's understandable and actionable, right?
Yeah, it's like you're already doing a form of expert witnessing every day, in a way.
I'd say so, yeah. So, becoming an expert witness, it really can be just a natural progression for those inspectors who are really passionate about using their expertise to make a real difference.
Yeah, like taking it to that next level, not just inspecting houses, but actually playing a key role in the legal process.
Yeah, for sure. And, those aha moments that we were talking about earlier, those moments where your expertise helps uncover that crucial piece of the puzzle, that's gotta feel good.
It's like being a detective.
It is. But even beyond, the thrill of that discovery, there's just real satisfaction in knowing that your work is contributing to a fair and just outcome. It's about using your skills to make sure that there's fairness and accuracy within the legal system as a whole.
It sounds like being an expert witness really does require a pretty unique combination of, technical knowledge, analytical thinking, and those communication skills that we were talking about.
Absolutely. And those are all skills that home inspectors, with their attention to detail, their understanding of, building science and their ability to communicate often complex information clearly, are already really well positioned to develop.
So for those listening who maybe are considering, going down this path, what advice would you give them based on Gary Smith's, 10 questions?
I would say use those questions as your guideposts. Really take them to heart. They're not just, a checklist to run through. They're really a framework for approaching expert witness work with integrity, professionalism, and a real commitment to excellence.
It's about knowing your limits, being thorough in how you approach things, and just always, always acting with integrity.
Exactly. And never stop learning. The construction industry is always changing. So staying up to date on the latest codes and technologies, best practices, that's essential.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of expert witnessing, what's the key takeaway you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
I think Gary Smith's 10 questions, they really provide a powerful roadmap for any home inspector who's thinking about, stepping into that role of expert witness. And by really considering these questions carefully and approaching every single case with diligence and integrity, home inspectors can really use their expertise to make a difference.
Well said. A huge thank you to Gary Smith for sharing all those invaluable insights. And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and hey, maybe we'll see you in court.